So, gentlemen and ladies, hello, hello, hello. Today, it's a very interesting interview because I have literally no clue about what we are going to talk about. It's one of the interviews that I really will shut the fuck up. Sorry for the for my friends, because I love history, and you people will soon understand why is that relative to our interview, history, and all that stuff. So before I keep going with my mumbling, let me introduce you all to my new guest, and I hope a new friend, Phoenix. Did I say that right, Phoenix?
You did, yes.
All right, Phoenix. Welcome to the channel, Phoenix. How are you, Phoenix?
I'm doing great, Dean. Thank you so much for having me on today. It was a real pleasure chatting with you, especially the time that we had before we started recording.
Yeah, yeah, it was honestly, yeah, like I say sometimes to other guests too, people that I talk. Sometimes when you talk before the recording, things are loosed up. Nobody's nervous. You seem like a guy that's very easy to talk to and very calm, very down to earth, very based. But there are people that I had in the past, and before we record, they are excellent. They talk, the words flow. But when we start recording, they tighten up and they, they put the
Yeah,
facade. It's sad,
yeah,
but I enjoy our time before too. So yeah, it was excellent.
me too. Meeting an old friend that I didn't know I had.
I mean, yeah, coming from an alchemist, that's really that's an honor to hear. So before we go to our main theme today, main subject, tell my Greek friends who are you and what is your background and all that stuff.
Sure. Yeah. So, like Dean said, my name is Phoenix Aurelius. I've been an alchemist for over 20 years in the Western alchemical tradition. I run a research facility called the Phoenix Aurelius Research Academy. And what we do is we run clinical trials and split tests on a wide variety of spagyric pharmacopoeia or alchemical medicines to see how effective they are versus pharmaceutical medicines or herbal medicines today. And I do a lot of other things besides. I'm also, like an astrologer, and pretty much anything within the Hermetic corpus of wisdom we focus on very intensely. And yeah, I guess that's really the basis of it.
All right. So many interesting subjects that you do. But since we have a limited time today, I want to ask you, and I guess the people are also wondering, what is Spagyria? What's the history of Spagyria? If you can, elaborate a little bit.
Absolutely. Well, I'm hoping that your Greek audience finds this really awesome because Spagyria actually it originated in Switzerland from a guy named Paracelsus, Theophrastus Bombastus von Hohenheim. He had several other names, Philippus Areolus Theophrastus Bombastus von Hohenheim, but he's known more readily as Paracelsus. And he came up with the term Spagyria as a method of creating alchemical medicines and applying alchemical wisdom to medicine, as opposed to just trying to transform lead into gold or baser metals into gold and things like this. And he basically revolutionized medicine as we knew it in the West. Many people, hopefully especially the Greek population, knows their heritage, that the majority of medicine in Europe up until Paracelsus' lifetime in the 1500s, everybody was practicing Galenic medicine, which was a Greco-Roman form of medicine that came out of humoral medicine of the Greek tradition, where there are four humors of phlegmatic, bilious, melancholic, and the other one is escaping my mind right now. So there are these four humors, and if they were in any sort of, which relate to the four Aristotelian elements of fire, air, water, and earth, and if any one of those were out of balance inside the body, then they would apply various herbs or sometimes unguents or various medications or cause them to purge in order to try and get the humors back into balance. And Paracelsus saw that by the time that system of medicine had been practiced for hundreds of years, that many of the doctors during his lifetime were actually messing people up. It sounds a lot like modern medicine, where modern medicine is actually making false diagnoses a lot of the times and hurting more people than they're helping in a lot of situations, just because of their lack of comprehensive understanding. So Paracelsus said that even though humoral medicine is important, and to take the entire heritage of that, he wanted to show people that there are better ways of performing medicines. And he did this by creating an entire field of chemistry that we now know as iatrochemistry. Iatrochemistry basically relies upon utilizing materials from nature and extracting out all of their medicinal components as an herbal material or as a mineral material or as a metallic material, but then adding in this mineral corpus as well that is able to activate it and turn it into basically pharmaceutical grade medicine. In fact, modern pharmaceutical medicine took everything that it knows from the art of Spagyria. So Spagyria comes from two ancient Greek words, spao, which means to separate, and agiros, which means to come back together, to recombine. Spao and agiros together, Spagyria is the way that it came to be known. It has its roots in the alchemical tradition, which really starts with Hermes, the Greek god Hermes, the messenger between gods and men. It's said within our tradition that Hermes the thrice great, Hermes Trismegistus, ended up creating an entire corpus of philosophy that was really based around three primary things: alchemy, astrology, and magic or Kabbalah. And that these three things are the things that still continue within the Hermetic tradition today in terms of what a person needs to practice if they're going to be skilled in these Hermetic arts. So alchemy had an enormous heyday in Egypt. And when the Greek Empire had dominated Egypt with Alexander the Great, they found this tablet that was allegedly written by Hermes Trismegistus that is called the Emerald Tablet. In Latin, we call it Tabula Smaragdina, which means literally the tablet emerald or the emerald tablet, the way that we would talk about it. And it gives a formula for how to transform anything and everything. And it's very short and very poetic. There's only 7 small paragraphs to that entire text, and it's very heavily encoded. So the Greeks had inherited alchemy from Egypt. Then after the Greek Empire had kind of come to an end, the Arabic tradition came up, and this was during the golden age of Arabic science and Islamic science. And we had a lot of Persian influence during that time from characters like Al-Jabir, who in the West is known as Geber. And then through the southern tip of Spain, where Morocco meets Spain, alchemy migrated its way up through the Arabic era around 900 AD into southern Spain. And then we start to see Moors of southern Spain starting to practice this, and Jews as well. And then from there, it started to permeate more into everyday European societies, especially the educated classes of, what we would now refer to as chemists, which at that time were alchemists, also doctors and other things. And so the ideas started to spread throughout Europe. And by the time that Paracelsus was alive, alchemy had already earned for itself a very poor reputation. And that's because there were so many people who were practicing or claiming that they knew the secrets to the transmutation of gold or to make elixirs that will extend life, that they were selling fake medicine. And we call it snake oil salesman in English today. And so they just were selling fake stuff that was not really helping people. And so many people were doing this that it earned a very poor reputation for itself. And when Paracelsus came along, he said, listen, we have all of the tools that we need to know how to make the very best medicine that can heal any disease and everything. Why are we still trying to focus on transforming lead into gold or other baser, more egotistical tasks? We should really be helping humanity to heal from the psychological and physiological diseases that plague us so that we can be happier and healthier people. And so he created an entire corpus of medicine, an entire system of medicine that has largely been forgotten. There are a lot of people today, especially in France and in the United States and in Canada, and even in Australia, who are practicing Spagyria again and bringing it back to life. But for hundreds of years, it's just been part of like the Rosicrucians and Freemasons, and they have taken the philosophy without the laboratory practices for the most part and just kind of preserved them in texts. So it's from them preserving it after the scientific revolution that it comes to us today, and that we are now reworking all of these items of pharmacopoeia and the entire theory and methodology of spagyric medicine. So it's a field, though, that is just as effective and just perhaps even more effective than things like traditional Chinese medicine and Ayurveda and pharmaceutical medicine. It's just a different branch, and largely it's been forgotten. So that's a big part of my work, is helping to bring awareness to this style of pharmacopoeia, helping people who have problems know where spagyrics exist in their area that will be able to help them, and performing rigorous scientific exploration on these items and how to make them and recreate them the way that they were talked about, so that we can create a healthy society once again in Paracelsus' dream.
Wow, that was a great brief history lesson about the whole stuff. And it's amazing, though, that, and I want your opinion before we go to the tinctures, because I read in your website a couple of things. So I want to talk about the tinctures and about local and how can that be different, Spagyria in, for example, in Greece, vs Spagyria in Scotland. So how can that be, applied? But before we go there, you said that in a way it was in ancient Egypt, and before that, can you remind me, before ancient Egypt?
As far as we know, alchemy really kind of started in ancient Egypt. It was their priest class who were making various chemicals that could be used as scent. And so they would use them in perfumes and in various ceremonies where they would burn things or transform things. And for the Egyptians, it was seen as a way of connecting with the gods and learning this very sacred form of how to transform physical common materials like metal ore and other things into more volatile liquids and stuff that would be used primarily for religious purposes. They would use it all just for pharaoh and for the higher priest classes to come in contact closer to the gods. So as far as we know, alchemy came to Earth with the Egyptians, the ancient Egyptians. And then, like I said, upon Alexander the Great having gone and conquered Egypt and creating the city of Alexandria, then we see that the Greeks inherited alchemy. And during that time, it was really cool, but the Greeks used it mostly for like industrial purposes. So they knew that they could tinge various metals. And so instead of making, like a handrail, for instance, temple or in a palace, that would be solid gold, because that would be very expensive, they would learn how to utilize these techniques to tinge or tincture or color the material of that metal to look as if it were gold. And they would also make paints and ores. And it was very much so for the production of more common things that you would see. It was used in shipbuilding to strengthen certain materials. It was used in art for, making paints and pigments. It was used in the production of makeups. The art was used very much so as a way of enhancing Greek culture. And so they didn't focus a whole lot on using alchemy for medicine during that period. It wasn't until the Arabic dynasty had basically overtaken the Library of Alexandria, burned most of the books, but some of them were saved, and they ended up translating those into Arabic, which then made its way into Europe and then got translated into Latin.
Yeah, that sounds right. Even alchemy, I guess, Phoenix is chemia in Greece, but I don't remember if it's a Greek word or an Arabic word, but the al usually is an Arabic pronoun.
Yes.
Something. So two things about what you said. First of all, same to the Greeks for not using it for medicinal purposes, if that's correct. Same to my ancestors. We are always more into art and dancing and less less about our health.
Sure.
We are famous for that. So, but another thing is, do you know the about the ancient Egypt and the origins of alchemy? Are you familiar with the works of Graham Hancock? So he and other guys in the field of alternative archaeology talk about the ancestry that supposedly we all have, that's probably before the times of
Right.
Egypt, or at least what we commonly know as the ancient Egyptian dynasties, like 5,000, 4,000, 3,000 years ago. Do you think that Spagyria is something that people more or less we can always be able to find if we truly listen to nature and the evolution? Can it really be lost? Because if it was in ancient Egypt, I'm just guessing that I have a feeling that even though yes, there are some lessons that you can get from a master. For example, I can learn from you. But even if we, for some reason, we lost it, do you think that it's something that we could probably, if we just follow the logic, find it again?
Absolutely. That's a great question, Dean. And yes, I do think so. And the reason is that at its core, alchemy and thus Spagyria are first and foremost the art and science of looking at nature and performing what is called biomimicry. So when heat acts upon the ocean or the rivers or the lakes or a pond, that body of water begins to evaporate and it rises through the atmosphere until it condenses as clouds and then falls back as rain. By any other term, that's the art of distillation. That's all we're doing. We're taking something inside of a flask, a liquid, and applying heat until it vaporizes to a point where it condenses and falls back to earth. And so, in fact, even in the Emerald Tablet, it tells us it rises from earth to heaven and descends again to earth, thereby combining within itself the powers of both the above and the below. And so, if we look to nature, we start to see every single one of the alchemical processes that we perform in our laboratory on a very large planetary scale. We see it in every ecosystem. When we talk about the process of calcination, we learn about forest fires. Like I know that Greece has had a lot of fires in the last few years, right? But, and as bad as that is right now, a few years from now, that will actually regenerate the forest. It helps the forest by having all of this biochar now that falls into the soil and then gives home to microbes like mycelium and fungi and into bacteria and archaea and all of the things that are necessary to regenerate the forest to be even healthier than it was before it burned down. This fire process is known as the process of calcination or reducing something to an ash. So everywhere we look as alchemists in nature, everything, we just see alchemical processes happening. And because Spagyria relies on alchemical processes to make alchemical medicines, I think anybody who is really well attuned to nature can find this. You know, and to be fair, Dean, it is really important too, just to say that every different culture has all found its form of alchemy historically in the ancient world. In China, they had Taoist practices and Taoist alchemy where they were performing very much so very similar things to the Western corpus, but they were understanding it through the filter of Taoism. And in India, doing the same thing, but understanding it through the filter of Hinduism. And that tradition today is called Rasa Shastra in India. And it's still alive, it's still being practiced. And it's thousands and thousands of years old, you know, allegedly 10,000 years old, goes back to the creation of the Rig Veda. So every different culture who notices nature understands that the human capability is to see what happens around him or her in nature and then to begin to replicate it to help work in tandem or to work together with nature for the evolution of both nature and the human species. And I think that even if Spagyria was lost today, let's say that there was an enormous earthquake or another big flood or something like this, volcanoes, you know, major disasters that were to wipe everything out except for a small population, I feel that that small population of people over time would end up realizing that there are certain sciences that they can learn from nature and replicate in order to bring all of this back, because that's all that it is, just looking at nature and seeing what she does and then performing it on a smaller scale.
Yes, I'm probably in agreement with you in what you said, and I didn't know about what you said about things going from Earth to the skies and from the skies to the Earth, and that sounds reasonable. And it's a very simple cycle, and most
It
people,
is.
yeah, it's true. It's that's what fascinates me really. Everything is fractal in nature, and if you really took a look outside, just look outside, you will find usually something dies and something reborns or changes form,
Yes.
but the energy you know what I think, Phoenix, is that people think that you die and the energy gets lost or something, and in essence, and that's you help me now realize that even more. It seems to me that it's just a transfer of energy, and alchemy is that you, in a sense, I might be wrong here, but it seems to me that in a sense you not enslave that energy, but you manage some of that energy in accordance to nature. You don't go against nature, so you don't try to break nature laws or try to tame nature, but in a sense you choose and pick a few probably energetic vortexes or something, or some things from nature, some transformations, and you put your hand there to help nature make it faster or something. And
Yeah.
yeah, from that perspective, is really alchemy is probably something that should be taught to young children, if
Yeah.
I may be brave and bold to say so. Do you agree? I don't know.
I do. I do think that. And in fact, I've taught my daughter alchemy from the time that she was just 2 years old. Just very simple things like, what happens if we dissolve salt inside of water, and then showing her how, depending on how we heat it and how we cool it, how we can grow new crystals of salt in very beautiful ways, and how crystals form inside of the earth, and how we can utilize that in the laboratory for making medicines as well. And so literally every aspect of it you can see. And for me, I look at all of the arts and all of the sciences as having a singular root that goes back millions of years, possibly in the human epoch. And we start to take a look at all of these natural processes and just how do they work? How can we replicate this? How do we understand this as human beings? That is what ultimately led to alchemy and then eventually to Spagyria being born. So I think that it's really important because it helps us to see what nature gives us. And then, once we understand it, now we can use it for lots of things. We can take any natural mineral that we find, say malachite, for instance. And then once we learn how to open it up, we find, oh, wow, there's a lot of cool things here. It has this color to it, and it has, these mineral spirits that can be extracted from it, and all these other things. How do we recombine these now? And then human ingenuity for art and for beauty come in, and they say, you know what, I can make a paint that makes the most beautiful blues or the most beautiful greens out of this particular ore. And I think that's the real beauty of understanding all of this is, as a child especially, is you see a rock and you just think, oh, okay, that's a rock. But if you knew how to take that rock and turn it into a paint, or turn it into a medicine, or turn it into something that holds more value, now that teaches you how to interact with nature and work with nature in a way that is so much more meaningful and expressive, and adds to the beauty of the human species.
That's a beautiful world. I mean, I would love to see that happening, and I'm glad that you do this with your children, and I hope that I will be able to do that with mine when the time comes. Having said all that, though, let's get down to the practical
Sure.
applications. So, all right, I read somewhere that tinctures, Spagyrial tinctures, are more effective than common herbal tinctures, if I
Mhm.
may say so. So, why is that?
Well, I don't want to get too technical with this. So if I get too technical, just be like, reel it in, Phoenix, reel it in. But basically, on a scientific level, what ends up happening is that in Spagyria, we philosophize that there are three aspects to everything. There is a soul, a spirit, and a body to everything. whether this is a mineral or a handful of dirt, or whether we're talking about you and me as a human individual. Everything that we work with in nature has a soul, a spirit, and a body, which we call sulfur, mercury, and salt. And that does not mean that it's brimstone as sulfur or metallic mercury or sodium chloride as salt. These are just ideas. They're archetypes that embody the soul, the spirit, and the body of things. And so what we do is we first have to make a spirit, and even in English today, a distilled spirit like ouzo, right? Ouzo is a spirit of Greece, right? It's something that is distilled largely from grapes, has some anise flavor, and it basically is a spirit that you drink, and it excites different states of consciousness. Anybody who's drunk too much ouzo knows that it can alter consciousness quite a bit. Same with wine or anything else. So first, what we do is we ferment things and then we distill them, and that gives us a spirit. And then we can take that spirit and extract, just like you would with ouzo, you extract the anise with it. And then this ends up infusing it with the soul of that plant. Now it tastes and it has the healing qualities of the anise. Then typically the anise in the making of ouzo would just be thrown away after that because there's nothing left, right? There's no more medicine to that. Well, this is where the alchemists say, no, that's not true. If we take that ouzo that has had all of its, or all of that anise that has had its essence pulled out of it, its soul is what we would call the essence. Once it's had all of that pulled out of it, there's still the body. And that body holds a tremendous amount of wisdom. So instead of just throwing away or composting that spent anise, we burn it. We reduce it down to an ash. And then we dissolve that ash in water, and we end up pulling out all of the constituents in there, which are mostly potassium based, and making crystals out of that potassium carbonate that comes from the ash. Now, when we have that, now we have three things really. You have the spirit that was first made, which is just the alcohol. Secondly, you have the essence of the herb that has been absorbed into the alcohol. And now we have this mineral salt. And when you add this mineral salt back to that essence, a very interesting thing happens. The process is known as iatrochemistry, but typically in the vegetable kingdom, from a scientific perspective, what's happening is that there are small acid-base reactions that are happening within the ethanol that are creating what are called plant esters. And there are all sorts of, the technical term is called esterification, where these plant esters are being synthesized because of these chemical reactions between the base, which is our potassium carbonate, and the acids that are naturally found inside of the essence that the plant has that are suspended in the alcohol. Now, potassium carbonate doesn't dissolve into alcohol, so the alcohol is just there as a transfer medium. And what ends up happening is that the medicinal components of the herb that are suspended in the alcohol react with that base. They create acid-base reactions and create new chemicals that were never found in the plant to begin with, that add to the potency of that plant. They add to the potency of the medicine. They make a whole new medicine. And so in modern day herbalism, when we are just extracting an herb and throwing away all of the biomass that was extracted, we only have 2/3 of the equation. We only have sulfur and mercury. We don't have salt. When we add sulfur, mercury, and salt, now new things happen. So a traditional herbal tincture may have lots of different chemical constituents to it. We call those phytochemicals. And those have a good action. Like herbal medicine is still good. It shouldn't just be discarded just because Spagyria is more potent. It's still good. But in the Spagyric tradition, we're not looking to get at all of those phytochemicals because we know that only just a few of them are absolutely necessary and can transform and change into something more potent that has a new expression of the plant. It's basically transforming or exalting the healing intelligence of that plant. And the process I just explained of adding, a plant to alcohol and then adding plant salt, those are really just the very basic items of pharmacopoeia. In Spagyria, we have at least 60 or 70 or more different items of pharmacopoeia that I know how to make from just about, all different plants and minerals and metals, but they all rely on that very same principle of utilizing the sulfur, the mercury, and the salt. And so with spagyric tinctures, if we take a spagyric tincture of, say, rosemary versus an herbal tincture of rosemary, and we compare them side by side clinically, like I do here at the Research Academy, we see that somebody has to take a tremendous amount, like say 3 or 4 tablespoons. Let me just translate that really fast to milliliters. They would have to take like 15 to 20 mils 3 times a day of a standard herbal tincture, sometimes more they would have to have the same effect that 5 drops once a day would have of the spagyric tincture. And they're totally different in their chemical composition. The herbal tincture has, a wide variety, rosmarinic acid, for instance, and, some of the other more pronounced phytochemicals in rosemary, whereas the acids have converted through that acid-base reaction and turned into plant esters in the spagyric. So you see some of the same constituents inside of a spagyric tincture, but you would also see new plant esters that never existed at all in the herbal tincture. And that's what makes it so much more potent and so much more efficacious with a smaller dosage.
While I was listening to you and you said about the potency and now talking about a much smaller dose, first of all, let me ask you, does Spagyria has anything to do with homeopathy?
Well, yes and no. Homeopathy was born by Dr. Samuel Hahnemann, who read Paracelsus' texts on Spagyria and drew inspiration from it. Same with Bach flower essences. They both read Paracelsian texts and drew inspiration from it. But in and of itself, most homeopathic medicines do not use the philosophy of containing sulfur, mercury, and salt. So with a homeopathic medicine, the basis is that you take something that in a normal dose would be poisonous, and then you dilute it to a very, very, very small amount and suspend that inside of water and then give that to that person, because a tiny amount of the poison gives you a remedy. Paracelsus did talk about that. He said everything is a poison. It's just the dosage that determines whether it's a poison or a medicine. And so that's where Dr. Samuel Hahnemann got his idea to create homeopathy. So homeopathy was inspired by Spagyria, but it doesn't use spagyric philosophy or even spagyric lab work. Today, and starting in the 1800s with Count Cesare Mattei in Switzerland and in Italy, he was like on the Italian-Swiss border, they started using spagyric medicines and diluting them homeopathically, and they created a new field of homeopathy known as spagyric homeopathy, or sometimes also called electrohomeopathy. And people can study that. They can become doctors in that today. It's very popular in most of mainland Europe, especially Germany, Austria, Switzerland, Italy. There are places you can go to the apothecaries there and you can pick up these new types of spagyric medicines, which are homeopathically diluted. And they are effective, okay? So it's not that they're not effective. They are very effective. They can help a wide variety of different things, but they don't have the same potency as what we call Paracelsian spagyrics, which are the medicines primarily that I create over here. They're just diluted very, very in small amounts. So homeopathy came out of Spagyria. There's even a new form of Spagyria that utilizes homeopathy today called electrohomeopathy, but they're not the same. They're just inspired by each other.
All right. Well, it was interesting. So when you talk about salts, and you talked about sulfur, and what was it? Sulfur,
Mercury, sulfur, and salt. Yeah.
Mercury, sulfur, and salt. Yeah. It comes to mind. It seems to me that it's a more holistic approach to medicine and to apothecary, and it's like using the whole plant, but also reviving it again. So as if you add with temperature and other probably energetic enzymatic processes, you add life back to it, more life back to it, and speeding up some reactions that would naturally occur in any case, and you basically make it more livable. Because when somebody says to me more potent, what comes to mind is more alive.
Sure. But Dean, I think that that's a really important concept. And earlier you were talking about, when people think that they die, they just die. Where does their soul or their spirit go? Spirit, in English, that term spirit comes from the Latin term respirare, which means to spirare means to imbue with life, to give life to. Respirare means to constantly imbue with life. And respirare has an English cognate called to respirate, to breathe, is what respirate means. So when we are breathing, we are taking in life force. We are imbuing ourselves with that life force. That is our spirit. And largely in life, for human intelligence, our spirit is our discipline, what we do that builds our character, that builds our spirit, that animates our body. So, for instance, if you just had to go to work and you didn't like work, your spirit would be very low. You're in low spirits, is the way we talk about this in English. If you're doing something you love, your energy is usually very enthusiastic and it builds you and it helps to animate you. This is what the concept of spirit is inside of the human individual. And so when you're dead, you don't breathe anymore. You have no more respirare. You have no more respiration. So that's one very important part. Two, in the human scope of things, when we talk about the soul, our soul is our personality. We actually have two different layers, two different functions of the soul. The first is our higher soul. And in the vegetables, this is mirrored by the essential oil of the plant, or the volatile oils of the plant. And so these, for the most part, they don't have a lot of color. They don't have a whole lot of substance in plants either. It takes a lot of plant material to be able to distill just a small amount of essential oil. That's true for pretty much all of the herbs that we see, with the exception maybe of a few resins like frankincense and myrrh and things like that. So that aspect of us is like our interests, our talents, the way that we think. That would be our higher soul. And some people in modern day metaphysics would call this the higher self, but it's the aspect of us that is our conscience. It's the aspect of us that holds all of our talents and interests. But then we also have another aspect of our personality, don't we? And this is tied in very much so with our physical body in a certain way, because it's the color of our hair, it's the sound of our voice, the color of our eyes, things like this. All of that also adds to your identity of who you perceive yourself as being. When you look into the mirror and you see yourself this particular way, that adds to your personality. When people see you and hear you talk and look at you, either you're beautiful or you're not beautiful, or you have a good sounding voice or a bad sounding voice, all of that is part of the soul of that individual coming across. And then the physical body is literally just organs, tissues, cells, mineral salts, amino acids, those types of things. And so when you die physically, your body dies, your spirit leaves your body. You take that last breath. If you've ever been around somebody who dies, they have this rattling breath. Their last breath sounds, it like rattles in the back of the throat as they let it out, always. It's sometimes known in English, we call that the death rattle. So that's very interesting. But what happens to the soul? Well, here's what happens. Anytime that a material dies in our flask, if it's contained inside of a fluid, then the spirit and the soul come out together. So, for instance, let's take something like a grape, okay? We're going to be talking about making wine here. We take a grape, we crush the grape. That's the body of the grape, right? That's its whole body. We crush it, and it expresses all of the juices. All of the microbes living on the outside of that grape end up eating away at the sugars that were part of the spirit of that grape, the juices, right? That's that in the vegetable kingdom, the waters and the fluids are part of that spirit. And so it ends up fermenting all of that material and turning it into a weak spirit. And instead of just plant juices, now it's alcohol. It's transformed from one form of water or juice and sugar to alcohol now. And if we distill that, if we put the wine into a flask and we distill it out, now we can get 95% pure grape spirit. But for anybody who's ever gone drinking and you taste a grape spirit, say like Pisco, which is Peru's national drink, if you drink Pisco, or if you drink whiskey, which is made out of barley, or if you drink, Everclear made out of corn, or if you drink other spirits, they all taste different. They still taste like alcohol, but you can taste the source that they came from. You can taste the barley in whiskey. You can taste the grape in Pisco. That is the small amount of the soul that always stays with that spirit. And so even when something dies, the soul and the spirit leave that manifestation, but they constantly volatilize and move in directions that will take them back to a new form. With alchemy, what we do is we purposely crush the body to release the spirit and the soul. That's where the spao, the separation, comes in. We separate the soul and the spirit from the body. And then through great lengths of distillation and other things, we separate out the soul and the spirit even more. And then we perfect those things so that anything that can die is lost or removed. And once we purify all of those things, then we take the soul and the spirit and we take the body, which from the body, we basically cremate it, that's to calcine it, and to build a new incorruptible and a perfect body, a pure mineral form that cannot die, that cannot decompose. And we infuse the soul and the spirit back into that body. So in a lot of ways, this is why the ancient Egyptians looked at it as a sacred art, because they were building pyramids and other structures that would help Pharaoh to go from earth back into the heavens and to become a god. That was their whole concept of Pharaoh. So he becomes God, but there needs to be a new Pharaoh. And so that God form descends back into a physical body and becomes a reincarnated Pharaoh once again through his own bloodline. This was their belief system, and that was very important. By the time it got to the Christians started to see that the allegories of Christ were the exact same, where Christ dies, but his spirit and his soul descends first into the flames. He calcines, right? And he purifies all of these aspects of himself through fire. But then he rises again from hell back into his physical body. And now he's incorruptible. He has wounds, but they don't hurt. He's alive, but he's this new perfect God form of the once physical entity known as Jesus. So every different culture that has ever had alchemy ends up showing that there is a prophet or a being or many beings that follow the same alchemical process. And we see this even in, before the show, I was telling you that I have Scottish and Irish descent. My ancestors, ancient ancestors, did the same thing, but instead of pyramids, they built these large round stone structures that were astronomically aligned as well, just very much so like the pyramids, just not a pyramid shape. And they felt the same thing happened, that they too would become immortal if they were to perform this type of spiritual alchemy. So this is what we see everywhere, all the way across the globe, regardless of what culture has it or what religion or what social cosmology they might have. We see that these very same principles are more or less put into effect and used. So it's very interesting because, as you say, you're able to bring it back to life. That's what we do. We kill the body, we perfect the body, and then we imbue that soul and that spirit back into the perfected body so that it takes on a new, transformed, or even exalted would be another good term, exalted state of existence. And in that way, it should be more potent and more incorruptible, more perfect.
Yeah, I have a billion questions that I could ask.
Good. That's what this is for.
So, in a sense, some people that may be a little bit conservative may think that this process of alchemy of Spagyria is people playing God, all right? But my personal opinion is that it's people playing with God together, and we are children of it. I think personally,
Yeah.
we have its spirit, And we try to find out how to use it properly. I mean, thank you for the lecture. The visualization of the examples you provided was exactly what I needed to understand, and I hope the audience also got it exactly like I really now have an initial form of understanding it. Like I mentioned before, is Spagyria different in different places of Earth? Does it have anything to do with the salts that are used, or with the geomagnetic properties of the land, the different plants? What is there? What is there to know?
That's a big question because there's everything to learn and there's a lot of things to find out. But traditionally, yes. Before we started, you were talking about the area where you live, and just about 10 minutes from you, having this really interesting geomagnetic signature. What we find is that things that have a good paramagnetic value respond to geomagnetism really well. In those places, the crops grow better. In those places, the plants are hardier, they're more resistant to disease and to insects, and they grow better. Typically, the people also live longer. There's just a lot of supporting evidence around this aspect of geomagnetism being used very consciously, especially by many ancient cultures. So we find that the best materials are found near these very sacred, almost all of the areas with high geomagnetism are used for sacred purposes. Like I think, and please correct me if I'm wrong, but you said that the Parthenon was actually built using the marble mined from this geomagnetic quarry. Why would they have done that? Well, it's obviously because it has some sort of spiritual significance to it. It's able to alter, even if they didn't have the terms of magnetism they understood that when they were near this thing, they felt closer to what they perceived to be as the divine. And such to the degree that building an enormous, beautiful temple complex with that particular stone is important to alter the consciousness of humans to be as close to the gods as possible. And so in order for humankind to really master its own potential, to be as evolved as possible, we need to, and always have, regardless of the culture on Earth, needed to be as close to the divine as possible. And when we can see from that perspective, it changes everything, because now we can use our hands and our intellect and all of the things of the human paradigm to perform things that the divine itself would perform on nature. And so, like you said, it's not that we're trying to play God or that we're trying to become a god or become gods. That's not the purpose of alchemy, nor has it ever been. It's that humankind was gifted and graced with the intellect and the ability to work with nature as nature works with herself. And when we understand these principles and understand nature as a fractal component of the divine, now we can see it eye to eye. We can become friends, we can become lovers, and work together for the proliferation and the benefit of everything together, instead of just being the effect of our environment, the effect of divine flow. And in that, the stars are very important to that. The electromagnetism of the stars and of the planets, those play an enormous role in geomagnetism. And therefore, because we are electrochemical, everything that's growing and living is electrochemical. And so every electrochemical creature responds to geomagnetism in a way that is somewhat unique to their species, but it always helps and elevates that expression if they are around a good, strong geomagnetic force. So yes, that is very important. The plants too, each plant, just like every person, has its own consciousness. Every mineral, every metal has its own consciousness. Metals are very pure. In fact, Pythagorean, right? Pythagoras. Okay, so Pythagoras says that there is an Italian movie called Le Quattro Volta, which means the four forms. And it's all based upon Pythagorean thought that when a human dies, the consciousness, because humans are the pinnacle of evolution in terms of we are the most complex. We're made of metals, we're made of minerals, we're made of vegetables, we're made of animals, and we are at the top now of that evolutionary ladder. So when humans die, Their consciousness devolves back into animal consciousness. The animal consciousness devolves back into vegetable consciousness. Vegetable consciousness devolves back to mineral consciousness, minerals back to metals, and then back again. And so you constantly have things moving in this form where everything is experiencing everything on earth. Every soul, every spirit, every body initially came from the metals. And how do we know that? Well, if I take a metal, say like sodium or potassium, and we react with an acid that is found in nature because of microbes, now that might turn into, say, potassium carbonate or potassium acetate. Now that metal just formed a mineral. Now potassium is the base of all of the plant kingdom. Like 98% of the plant kingdom reduces down to potassium. So that metal, potassium in particular, devolves and becomes less pure in its form, because potassium is just one atomic element, right? Now it's breaking apart and it's creating a molecule. It's less stable and it's less pure, but it has more function. Then that potassium gets taken up by the plants. Again, now plants have hundreds of phytochemicals in them, but they came from that potassium carbonate. So they come from the mineral, and then they grow up and they are less pure because they have more chemicals. So it's not as pure as just one potassium atom, or even as pure as just the potassium carbonate. It's more elaborate and more complex, but it's able to do more than what the potassium was. So there's this inverse ratio between purity and volatility that is basically sets everything in nature just a couple of degrees apart. So we consider the metals, and this is a very Pythagorean idea, that the metals are the most pure forms of consciousness possible. And that's why in the higher aspects of alchemy, people are working with metals. And that's even why people are making, within the scope of alchemy, the philosopher's stone, which is said to be able to transmute any baser metal, whether it's sodium or potassium or mercury or lead, into gold. Because the idea is, can I perfect the metallic state of consciousness to the king of the metals, to gold, which is completely pure. It can never tarnish. It never breaks down into lesser forms inside of nature. It's always pure metallic gold. It's the color of the sun. It's like the sun is to us in the sky, where we see it as a golden ray that illuminates our planet and gives birth to all growing and living things. We think that gold is personified in the metals basically as the sun, the solar system of the metals. So we see that all of nature just reverts back to the more simple states and then evolves back into more complex states, simple states, complex states. And in many different cultures, including in India, when they talk about reincarnation, these ideas mimic this concept very, very well. And Pythagoras was actually kind of ostracized during his lifespan for talking about reincarnation. But he said very, very much so, like all of us alchemists today, that there is a direct correlation between music and astrology and geometry, because that is the entire basis of frequency and vibration. And once you understand frequency and vibration, we take a look at the geometry as the way that the crystals grow of all of the metals and all of the minerals. We take a look at the frequency that they put out. That is music by any other concept. Frequencies are music. They are hertz, they are waveforms. Even if we can't hear it, it's still music. And then, of course, we have astronomy, which is to say the movement of ideas and of social themes and other things as dictated by electromagnetic resonance. For instance, when Jupiter comes very close to the Earth, Jupiter has a very large magnetosphere. Earth has a decent sized magnetosphere. Those magnetospheres play upon each other, and it changes the geomagnetism and the electromagnetic signature of the Earth at these times. And so, again, we're dealing with a form of vibration, but we're dealing with it with astronomical bodies. And so we see that these very same principles are absolutely critical and important in the alchemical paradigm, because they teach us about how nature on a macrocosmic scale, on a larger fractal scale, comes into play into our smaller microcosm as our ecosystem, even just our lives in general. So they all operate very much so according to the same principles. Even you could say that geometry is the salt, that music would be the spirit, and that astronomy would be the sulfur, or the soul of that lesson. So we see these ideas, these concepts constantly repeating and being able to be explained in multitudinous different ways.
Right. My mind is blown to pieces.
Well, that's good. Give you something to think about for a few days.
Yeah, for a few months, maybe, to be more correct.
Sure, fair enough.
So, all right. So I have to thank you for this analysis. Now it makes sense. I had the pieces, but you connected the dots for me. So you are to blame for my newfound interest in alchemy. So, and
Okay.
my thousands of hours that I'm going to spend over a few next years. So you are to blame for that. I know that we spend a lot of time, so I'm respectful of your time. We could probably do a part two at some point.
I'd love to, yeah.
Yeah, I would love to too. It was my honor that you came by and talked about all these things and all these principles. And I hope our audience, they enjoyed this chat also. So where can people find you, Phoenix? And what do you cook up these days? Is there any tincture that you are promoting or anything?
Sure. Thank you for that. Yeah. So people who are interested in my work can find out more by going to my website at phoenixaurelius.org. That will take you to the home of the Phoenix Aurelius Research Academy. We have a very interesting business model because we don't want to take grants and we don't take investments from any other companies because they end up telling us what we can research and how we can publish our findings. And we don't want that. We want to be able to explore everything that we want to explore, do it in the detail, and not be restricted by other people's financial demands that are placed on us. So what we do is we make hundreds and hundreds of different items of spagyric pharmacopoeia. And anytime that you purchase one of those, you're funding the research for that plant or funding the research for that item of pharmacopoeia. So everything is privately funded just based on sales on our website. So people can schedule consultations with me, they can order products, all of that ends up going into the pot to help us fund everything that we study and research over here. So we have a lot of spagyric tinctures. For those of you who are in the European Union, I'm sorry, we cannot ship. I mean, we do sometimes, but customs can be really hard to get products from the United States into the European Union. But I do make other things as well, like the astronomological calendar, which uses astronomy and astrology together and shows all of the celestial forces that are happening at any given time. Things like that ship to all of the European Union. We have many products that aren't considered supplements that can ship to the European Union as well. So that's that. But if you're outside of the European Union or you happen to come visit United Kingdom or Ireland, for some reason, Ireland, even though they are part of the EU, they're very easy to ship to. So, and if you come to the United States or other things like that, we have tons and tons and tons, hundreds and hundreds of products that you can purchase. And for those of you who are in Greece, I will give Dean a link to my student, Sakis. He makes many spagyric tinctures. He's just located in Mount Pelion area. So he would be who I would refer all of the Greek population to get interested and to learn more. He's fantastic, one of my very best friends, and definitely one of my hardest working students.
Thanks, many thanks. We'll do that. So what else can I say? Thanks for coming on, and thanks for the tremendous value that you provided today. I feel your frequency being very balanced, and I enjoyed this talk very much, and I thank you for this. And I really hope to reconnect in a few months.
Yeah.
And see how things are going up then, and maybe do something interesting together. And yeah,
that'd be great. It was a pleasure to come on your show, and anytime that you would like to have more talks, I'm always game. It's like I said, it was like finding an old friend that I didn't even know that I had. So
Amazing, amazing. All right, then, Phoenix. Thank you very much. For anybody else, for anyone else, thanks for listening. Support the work. Go check Phoenix's tinctures and all the things that he provides. And see you in another interview. Ciao, ciao from the Greek Wolf and Phoenix Aurelius.